In the freezing hospital hallway just before midnight, the doctor told me my daughter hadn't survived the delivery. I was still struggling to stay on my feet after hearing she was gone when my son-in-law turned to his mother and whispered, "File the paperwork before Friday. We have to get that money no matter what." But the moment that truly sent a chill down my spine came when the night shift nurse secretly slipped a small notebook into my hand. On the first page were a few shaky lines, and my son-in-law's name circled in red ink. "I'm genuinely grateful you're here right now, wherever here is for you. Drop a comment and tell me what city, what country are you watching from." I read every single one. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it, that one's worth keeping. I was reading a book when the phone rang. That's the detail I keep returning to, not because it means anything, but because it's the last ordinary thing I remember. The lamp on, a glass of water sweating on the side table, the clock reading 11:43. And then my phone lit up with an Atlanta area code I didn't recognize, and the world I'd been living in quietly ended somewhere around page 212. The voice on the other end was calm, the way hospital voices learn to be, not because the person wasn't sorry, but because they'd been trained that calm was the only thing that didn't make it worse. "Claire Hargrove Voss. Emergency surgical procedure. Please come to Harlow Medical Center as soon as you're able." I don't remember putting on shoes. I remember the cold of the steering wheel. I remember running a red light at Peachtree and not caring even a little. By the time I reached the hospital at 11:57, the corridor outside the surgical suite on the third floor was already occupied. Marcus was there, his mother, Diane, and a woman named Petra, introduced to me once at a birthday dinner 2 years back as a college friend of Marcus's, though I had never quite believed it. All three of them standing together in the hallway in a way that bothered me before I could explain why. Not pacing, not scattered the way frightened people scatter. They were grouped, still, like people who had already had a conversation and reached a conclusion before I walked in. Marcus turned when he heard the elevator open. "Leo." He crossed to me quickly and put a hand on my arm. The grip was firm, practiced. "She's still in surgery. They told us they'd update us soon." "What happened?" I asked. "What went wrong?" "They're not sure yet. Something with the delivery." He said it the way you describe a delayed flight. His eyes were dry. I sat down in one of the chairs along the wall. Diane said something that was probably meant to sound warm, and I nodded without processing any of it. Petra stood slightly behind Marcus, her thumb moving over her phone screen. I noticed that. I noticed the phone. I noticed the way Marcus kept his weight balanced forward like a man waiting for a signal rather than a man waiting for news. At 12:15, the surgeon came through the OR doors. His name was Dr. Ellison, still in scrubs mask hanging around his neck. He looked at me when he spoke. Not at Marcus, not at Diane, at me. I think someone had told him which one of us was her father. "Mr. Hargrove." He paused the way they pause when they need a moment to make sure the words come out right. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." There it was. You always know before the sentence finishes. The body knows first, then the mind catches up, and then the words arrive just to confirm what you've already understood somewhere deep in your chest. A uterine rupture, a cascade that moved faster than anyone could stop. Claire was gone. I don't know how long I sat with that. 30 seconds, 5 minutes. The chair stopped feeling solid somewhere in between. And then Diane spoke. "What about the paperwork we discussed?" I looked up. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't even trying to make it sound like anything other than what it was. She was looking at Marcus with a focused, expectant expression, the look of someone checking to confirm a plan was still in motion. Marcus turned to Dr. Ellison without missing a beat. "Is there someone we should talk to tonight about the documentation from Claire's admission, her policy information, the forms she signed?" Dr. Ellison blinked. Of all the responses he'd been prepared for, that clearly wasn't one of them. "Sir, administrative matters can absolutely wait until morning. Right now, I'd encourage you all to—" "Of course." Marcus nodded, easy, immediate. Then he looked at me, and I watched his expression shift. Grief dropping into place the way a curtain falls, sudden and complete. One full beat too slow. "Leo, I'm so sorry." She was everything. Correct words, correct volume, one beat too slow. Petra had stopped scrolling. She reached out and touched Marcus's arm, not the way you reach for someone who has just lost a person they love, the way you reach for someone to confirm that things are proceeding as expected. I saw it. I couldn't name it, yet couldn't build it into anything coherent through the static of what I'd just been told. But I saw it. Down the hallway, a nurse had been at the station the whole time. I'd registered her the way you register furniture, present unremarkable part of the backdrop. She was somewhere in her mid-40s with the kind of steady face that comes from years of learning to hold things in because showing them out loud makes the work impossible. Her badge read R. Coleman, RN. She wasn't charting anymore. She was watching Marcus. Slowly, without looking up, she reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small notebook, spiral-bound personal, the kind you pick up at a drugstore for $2. She opened it to a clean page, wrote something down, the date, the time, maybe a name. I noticed, and I believe she noticed that. I noticed. The hallway settled into the particular quiet that only comes after the worst thing has already happened. Not peaceful, just emptied. The kind of quiet where you can hear the ventilation system and the distant rhythm of monitors and the small, deliberate sound of Diane's heels shifting on the floor. I looked at my daughter's husband. He was checking his phone. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say, not yet. Not in that hallway, not with grief sitting in my chest, like something too dense to breathe around. But somewhere underneath all of it, in a part of my mind that hadn't gone quiet at all, a question was already forming. And whatever the answer was, I had a feeling the woman with the notebook already knew at least part of it. Nobody tells you about the waiting that comes after. There's the waiting before when your person is still in surgery, and every sound from behind a closed door feels like it could be news. But the waiting that comes after is a different animal entirely. It has no purpose. It goes nowhere. It just sits with you in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights while the world keeps running on a schedule it forgot to cancel. I didn't move for a long time after Dr. Ellison walked back through those doors. I'm not sure I could have, even if I'd wanted to. Grief does that. It doesn't announce itself dramatically. It just makes ordinary things impossible. Standing up. Forming a sentence. Deciding whether the cup of water someone put in your hands is something you're supposed to drink. Marcus had moved to the far end of the hallway. He had his back to us, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice kept deliberately low. I wasn't trying to listen, but the corridor was quiet enough, and he wasn't quite careful enough, and I caught pieces of it the way you catch cold air through a gap in a window. Tonight, if possible? Yes, both of them need to be. A pause. The account has to be restructured before... His voice dropped further. I lost the rest. I looked at my hands. Diane settled into the chair beside me. She put her hand over mine, with the practiced warmth of a woman who had performed sympathy so many times it had become muscle memory. Leo, I want you to know that we are going to get through this together, as a family. Thank you, Diane. Claire would want that. Yes, I said, she would. There was nothing in Diane's eyes that matched her words. Not grief, not guilt, just assessment. The look of someone running calculations behind a pleasant expression. I'd seen it before at holidays across dinner tables in the small moments when Diane didn't think anyone was paying attention. I'd always told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. Marcus ended his call and came back. He was holding a manila envelope under his left arm, thick enough to hold several pages, edges crisp in the way documents get when someone has handled them with intention. He sat across from us, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at me with an expression that almost worked. Lily, I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. She was... He stopped, swallowed. She was my whole life. I nodded. He held the pause for exactly the right number of seconds. Then, did the hospital give you any paperwork when you came in? Anything related to Claire's admission, her insurance information, her advance directives? I looked at him. I'm asking, he said, because I want to make sure everything is handled correctly. For the baby. Claire would have wanted everything in order. The baby. He said it the way you'd reference a line item in a spreadsheet. I haven't received anything, I said carefully. Right, of course. He shifted the envelope slightly, moving it just behind his knee. I just want to make sure we're organized, that's all. Are you okay? He asked at last. Are you okay? After the documentation, after the insurance, after the envelope he was now deliberately keeping out of my line of sight. Are you okay came last. I said, I'm managing, and watched his face for something any flicker of the man my daughter had chosen some trace of genuine loss. What I found instead was patience. The specific patience of someone waiting for a conversation to move to the part that actually mattered to them. Petra appeared from around the corner with 3 cups of vending machine coffee. She handed one to Diane, one to Marcus. She looked at me and said, I didn't know how you take it. Anne set the third one on the chair beside me without quite meeting my eyes. A few minutes later, the nurse Rita Coleman came down the hall. She set a cup of actual water in front of me and crouched slightly so she was at my level, the way you do when you need someone to actually hear what you're saying. Mr. Hargrove, her voice was low, controlled. Is there anyone you could call tonight? Not a family member. A pause. A professional, someone who handles estates or legal matters. It's 1 in the morning, I said. I know. She held my gaze. Some things don't wait well. She straightened up and walked back toward the station before I could ask her what she meant. Before I could ask why a night shift nurse in a surgical corridor was suggesting I call a lawyer while my daughter's body was still warm behind a closed door. I looked at the envelope under Marcus's arm. He'd shifted it again. When Rita came over, tucked it further behind him, the way you move something out of frame when you don't want it in the photograph. It was a small motion, instinctive. The kind of thing a person does without thinking, which is exactly when you see who they actually are. I filed it away. All of it. The phone call, the documentation question, the envelope, Rita's 4 words. I didn't know what I was building yet, but something in me understood I needed to start building it. At some point I understood that I needed to get out of that hallway. Not away from the hospital. I couldn't have done. That couldn't have left the building where Claire had last been alive, not yet. But the fluorescent lights and the plastic chairs and the particular sound of Diane's voice murmuring to Marcus in the corner had started to feel like a pressure against the inside of my skull, and I knew that if I stayed in that hallway another hour, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. So I stood up, told no one where I was going, and walked toward the elevator. The parking garage was cold in the way concrete structures are cold at 2 in the morning. Not the sharp cold of outside, but a still settled cold that seeps up through the floor and into your shoes. I found my car in the same space where I'd left it an hour and a half ago, though. It felt like a different decade. I got in. Closed the door. Did not start the engine. Grief, I have learned, does not look the way you think it will. You imagine it as something loud and total, something that announces itself and takes over the room. What I experienced in that parking garage was quieter and more disorienting, less like a wave, and more like the moment after a wave when the water has pulled back and you're left standing on ground that doesn't quite feel like ground anymore. Everything familiar had the same shape it used to have. It just didn't mean the same things. I thought about the last time I'd seen her. 3 Sundays ago. She'd come for lunch, just the 2 of us, the way we did every few weeks, the tradition we'd kept since her mother left, when Claire was 11. She'd been tired, carrying the weight of a pregnancy that was deep into the 3rd trimester, moving carefully the way women move, when their bodies are doing something enormous. We'd eaten on the back porch. She'd rested her hands on her belly, the way you hold something you're afraid of dropping. I'd asked if she was okay. She'd said, "I think so, Daddy, I think so." I should have pushed. I didn't push. And then, without choosing to, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing on the sidewalk outside Ridgemont Elementary School on a Tuesday morning in September 23 years ago. The air had that particular first-day sharpness to it, cool enough for jackets, but not quite cold. The leaves just beginning to think about turning. Claire was 6 years old. She had a backpack with a yellow duck on it that she'd insisted on, and her hair was in 2 braids that I'd spent 45 minutes learning how to do, the night before from a video on the internet. She held my hand the entire walk from the car to the front door, held it the way a person holds something they're afraid of losing. At the door she stopped. "Don't let go, Daddy," she said. "I won't," I told her, and I meant it. I meant it in every way a person can mean something. She went in. I stood on that sidewalk for longer than I should have, and eventually I let go because that's what you do. You let go because the whole point of holding on was so they'd be strong enough to walk through the door alone. I thought about that a lot sitting in the parking garage, whether I'd held on long enough, whether the letting go had come at the right time, the right way, or whether I'd done it wrong somewhere and just hadn't known until now. I took out my phone. Her contact was still there, of course. It would be there for a long time before I'd be able to do anything about it. I pressed call, not because I expected anything, just because I needed to hear it. 1 ring, 2. "Hey, you've reached Claire. I'm probably in the middle of something. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I surface." I listened to it 3 times. 4. The 5th time I closed my eyes and just let her voice be a voice in the dark, familiar and steady and present, in the only way it could be now. I didn't leave a message. What would I have said? I sat with the phone in my lap and watched a delivery truck move slowly through the far end of the garage headlights, sweeping across concrete columns. And I was so still, so completely inside my own grief that I almost didn't notice the figure who appeared near the stairwell door. Marcus. He had his phone to his ear and was walking slowly, head down, not looking up. He hadn't seen me. My car was in shadow engine off, no reason for anyone to think it was occupied. I stayed absolutely still. "The deadline is still Friday," he said. His voice carried clean and flat through the concrete quiet. "If the court opens at 8:30, we need to be in line before that. First thing." A pause. He slowed, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. I know, but the baby that changes the timeline. We have to account for the additional. Another pause longer. No, I understand. Just make sure everything is ready. He ended the call. He stood there for a moment, staring at the ground. Then he straightened his jacket, turned, and walked back through the stairwell door. It swung shut behind him, with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. I sat in the dark for what felt like a long time. The baby. He'd said it like it was a variable in an equation, like it was something to be accounted for, adjusted around, factored into a timeline that apparently had a Friday deadline. The baby. The same phrase he'd used upstairs in the hallway, with the same flat managerial quality, like a line item, not a life. But Claire had been pregnant. I knew that. There was a child. And whatever Marcus was rushing to file before Friday morning, whatever was in that envelope, whatever phone calls he was making, in parking garages at 2 a.m, while I sat 10 feet away in the dark, it had something to do with that child. I got out of the car. My legs carried me back toward the elevator before my mind had finished deciding to go. The cold of the garage fell away behind me, replaced by the warmth of the lobby, the hum of the building, the particular antiseptic smell that I was already beginning to associate with the worst night of my life. Whatever question had been forming in the hallway had just sharpened into something I couldn't set aside anymore. And somewhere on the 3rd floor, a woman with a spiral-bound notebook was still on duty. The elevator felt slower going up. Or maybe it was just me standing in it with the cold of the parking garage still on my jacket and Marcus's voice still running in my head like a recording I couldn't shut off. The deadline is still Friday. The baby changes the timeline. I replayed it the whole ride up, each word sharpening with each repetition, until the doors opened on the 3rd floor, and I stepped back into the fluorescent corridor with a feeling in my chest that was no longer purely grief. It was something closer to purpose. Rita Coleman was still at the nursing station. The shift wouldn't change for another 2 hours, and she was moving through the kind of quiet, methodical end-of-night work that nurses do when the ward has settled, charting, checking, keeping the machinery of the place running while the rest of the world slept. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Mr. Hargrove. Not surprised, like she'd been expecting me to come back. I lowered my voice. He said something in the parking lot. Marcus. He didn't know I was there. I paused. He mentioned a baby, and a deadline, and something that needed to be filed before Friday. Rita set her pen down. There's a limit to what I can tell you, she said. I want to be clear about that up front. Medical records, patient information, none of that is mine to share. That's not me being difficult. That's the law, and it protects people, including your daughter. She held my gaze. But what I've seen with my own eyes in this hallway and this building, that's my testimony. That I can give you. Then tell me what you've seen. She looked past me for a moment, checking the corridor in both directions. Then she said, Your son-in-law has been to this hospital 3 times in the past month. I know because I was working 2 of those shifts and a colleague mentioned the 3rd. Each time he didn't go to the OB department. He didn't go to the birth center. He went to the financial counseling office. She paused. Alone, without your daughter. I held that. Hospital financial counselors. I knew in the vague way you know, things you've never needed to use, handled insurance coverage questions, billing disputes, payment plans for procedures. They were the people you saw when you needed to understand what a surgery was going to cost or how your policy applied. They were not, as far as I understood, people a husband visited repeatedly while his pregnant wife was presumably attending prenatal appointments on another floor. Did he give a reason? I don't know what he told them. That office isn't my department. She glanced past me again. But there's something you should see. She nodded toward the far end of the corridor, the administrative wing separated from the nursing floor by a long stretch of hallway and a set of glass-paneled doors. Through the glass, I could see the admin corridor was lit, and at the window of the after-hours service desk, I could see Marcus. He was leaning on the counter, pushing papers across it toward a woman in scrubs. Whatever he was saying it fast. I took a step toward the glass doors. Rita's hand came up, not grabbing just present. You can't go in there right now, but wait. I waited. It took about 4 minutes. Marcus gathered whatever had been returned to him, tucked it under his arm, the same manila envelope or a different one I couldn't tell, and walked away from the counter without looking back. He took the stairwell door at the far end. Gone? Rita looked at me. Go ask her what he wanted. The woman at the after-hours desk was in her early 30s, name badge reading S. Dunmore Administrative Services. She looked up when I came in, and I could tell from her expression that she was deciding how much to say before I'd even opened my mouth. I said, I'm Leonard Hargrove. Claire Hargrove Voss was my daughter. The man who just left Marcus Voss is her husband. She passed away tonight. I held the silence for a moment. I need to understand what he just submitted. Sandra Dunmore looked at the counter, then back at me. She was quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "He didn't file it through the hospital. He used his attorney's emergency e-filing account and asked us to fax supporting hospital documents to counsel. I can't see the full petition, but the cover sheet listed Fulton County Probate Court and marked the matter as urgent." She spoke carefully, like someone choosing each word for its weight. "We transmit the documents. The court receives them. It's typically used for time-sensitive estate matters." "What did he file?" Another pause. "Sir, I can tell you the category of the filing. I can't share the specific contents." She met my eyes. It appeared to be an emergency guardianship and conservatorship petition, with a request for authority over the child's benefits and related financial decisions. I heard the words. I understood them individually. It took my brain a moment to assemble them into what they actually meant. An emergency guardianship petition asks the probate court for legal authority over a minor child's care. A conservatorship request goes further. It asks for control over the child's money benefits, insurance payments, and financial decisions. In Georgia, a Fulton County judge can review such a petition within 24 hours if the filer demonstrates immediate need. Marcus had filed one for a child. Tonight, while my daughter's body was still on the other side of a closed door down the hall. "Thank you," I said. I'm not sure how I said it. I walked back out into the corridor and stood there for a moment with my hands at my sides and the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. Rita was waiting where I'd left her. "He filed for guardianship," I said, "of the baby." She nodded slowly, like she'd already known, like she'd been watching this particular story arrange itself for longer than one night. "Rita," I looked at her directly, "what baby Claire was?" I stopped, reorganized. "What is he filing guardianship for?" She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not hesitation, but the careful deliberation of someone deciding how much weight a person can carry at one time. "Mr. Hargrove," she said quietly, "I think you should sit down." And the way she said it told me that whatever came next was going to change the shape of the night entirely. I sat. Rita pulled a chair from behind the station and positioned it across from me, close enough that she didn't have to raise her voice above a murmur. The corridor was empty in both directions. The ward had settled into the particular quiet of the last hours, before a shift changed the kind of quiet where every word carries. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at me the way people look when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. "I need to be careful about how I do this," she said. "So I'm going to tell you exactly what I saw and heard tonight in this building, with my own eyes and ears. Nothing from a chart, nothing from a record. Just what I witnessed." "I understand." "At 12:31 this morning, I was charting at the station. Your son-in-law and his mother were approximately 12 feet away from me. They didn't appear to notice I was there." She paused. "He said, and I'm giving you his exact words, 'If the account transfers before the court date, we won't need the settlement at all.' And she said, 'Then make sure the paperwork is clean.'" The room didn't move. "I wrote it down immediately," Rita continued. "The time the words their names." She reached beneath the counter and produced the spiral notebook I'd seen her writing in hours earlier. She opened it to a page, turned it to face me, 2 lines time-stamped. Her handwriting was clear and even. At the bottom, her full name and credentials, Rita A. Coleman, R.N. "This is mine to give," she said. "My notes, my testimony." I looked at the words on the page. Then I looked up at her. "What account? What court date?" "I don't know, but there's one more thing." She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and produced a folded piece of paper, not from the notebook, a separate sheet. She set it on the counter between us. "At 1:15 this morning, your son-in-law was standing near the elevator bank holding a document. I wasn't trying to read it. I was walking past to check on a patient, but the cover page was facing outward and the header was visible in the light." She unfolded the paper. On it, she'd written exactly what she'd seen. "Beneficiary designation, change form, Harlow Life Insurance account, policyholder, Claire E. Hargrove, Voss." I read it twice, 3 times. "A beneficiary designation form, I knew in the way you know, things you hope you'll never need to use, is the document that determines who receives the payout from a life insurance policy when the policyholder dies. Most people fill it out once when they first sign up for coverage and forget it exists. But it can be changed at any time, and when it's changed, the new designation overrides everything, including a will. If Marcus had that form, and if he was attempting to change who received the payout from Claire's policy, then whoever was currently listed as the beneficiary, the baby presumably, or a trust, stood to be replaced by whoever Marcus named instead. And given the debt he'd mentioned on the phone, given the deadline he was racing toward, the destination of the money was not difficult to imagine. He had this tonight, I said. He brought it here. That's what I saw. I sat with it. The pieces were arranging themselves in a way I didn't want to look at directly, but couldn't stop looking at. 3 visits to the hospital financial counselor, the form, the emergency guardianship petition, the deadline on Friday, an account that needed to transfer before a court date, and then without warning a memory surfaced that I'd filed away as nothing. 6 weeks ago, a Sunday call, Claire on the other end, her voice carrying that particular lightness she used when she was trying not to sound worried. Dad, can I ask you something kind of weird? Always, I'd said. Marcus has been asking questions lately about my insurance policy, about what happens financially if something goes wrong with the birth. A pause. He says he's just being thorough, that it's practical. He's probably anxious, I'd told her. First baby. People get fixated on logistics when they're scared. Yeah. She'd been quiet for a moment. Yeah, you're probably right. Never mind. How's your garden? And I had let her change the subject. I had let her put that small, careful worry back in her pocket and move on, because it had seemed like the easier thing, and because I had genuinely, completely believed that Marcus was the man she'd chosen and that her judgment was good. I had been so certain her judgment was good. I looked at my phone. 5:03 in the morning. I had one contact in my phone for situations like this, though I'd never imagined I'd ever be in a situation like this. Carol Deming, estate and trust attorney. I'd used her once 15 years ago to update my will after Claire's mother left. She was thorough, she was sharp, and she was the kind of lawyer who answered her phone at unusual hours. She did not answer at 5:03. I left a message. I kept it short. My name, my daughter's name, the words emergency and tonight, and please call me. And I set the phone on the counter and looked at Rita. Is there anything else? I asked. Not that I have the right to tell you, she said, but I'll say this. She closed the notebook. In 19 years of nursing, I've watched a lot of people receive devastating news in this building. I know what it looks like when someone is broken open by grief. She held my gaze. I did not see that tonight from your son-in-law. What I saw was something else, and I thought you should know what I saw. We sat in silence for a while after that. The hospital moved around us a cart somewhere down the hall, the faint sound of a monitor, the ventilation system doing its steady, indifferent work. Outside the windows at the end of the corridor, the dark was just beginning to shift at its edges. At 5:47, my phone rang. Carol Deming, her name on the screen. I picked up before the second ring. Leo. Her voice was clear and awake in a way that told me she'd been up for a while. I'm so sorry about Claire. I saw the missed call and She paused. Actually, I've been waiting for you to call. Something in the way she said it made the hairs on my arm stand up. Carol, I said. What do you know? She didn't answer immediately. That was the first thing I noticed, not a hesitation born from not knowing, but the deliberate pause of someone deciding where to begin. 6 weeks ago, Carol said, your daughter came to my office, alone. She didn't tell Marcus she was coming, and she asked me specifically not to reach out to him. Another pause. She wanted to update her estate documents, and she wanted to establish a trust for the baby. Carol Deming had been my estate attorney for 15 years, sharp, methodical, the kind of woman who kept files the way surgeons keep instruments, everything in its place and ready. I'd called her once when Claire's mother left to make sure things were in order. I hadn't needed her since. I was glad now that I'd kept her number. And she never told me, I said. I know. She said she didn't want to worry you until she had something concrete. Carol's voice was steady, but not cold. She said, and I'm quoting her directly, Marcus has been asking questions I don't have good answers for, and I need to make sure certain things are protected before I figure out what that means. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. She was scared, I said. She was careful. There's a difference, and she knew it. A brief pause. Claire set up a revocable living trust. She named you and me as co-trustees. The sole beneficiary is the child. I knew the term trust the way most people do in the general sense without the specific architecture of it. Carol explained it the way she always explained things clearly and without condescension, as though information was a tool you deserved to have properly assembled. A revocable living trust is a legal arrangement in which assets are held and managed by trustees on behalf of a named beneficiary. The key difference from a standard will is that assets inside a trust do not pass through probate court, the public process through which an estate is reviewed, validated, and distributed. Trust assets transfer privately according to the trust's own terms. And because the trust itself is the owner of those assets, a surviving spouse has no automatic right to access them. But Marcus can't touch it, I said. Not directly. He has no standing to act on the trust. He's not a trustee, and he's not the beneficiary. Carol paused. But here's the part you need to understand. As the legal guardian of a minor child who is the trust's beneficiary, Marcus could file a petition with the probate court requesting that trust funds be released for the child's care and welfare. Courts approve these petitions routinely when the expenses are legitimate medical costs, housing, education. And if the expenses aren't legitimate, then the mechanism becomes a way to extract money from a protected account under the cover of parental responsibility. Her voice didn't change. It didn't need to. The trust holds Claire's life insurance policy $500,000, her investment account approximately $240,000, and a property interest in the marital home that she held in her own name prior to the marriage. Total value approximately $840,000. I sat with that number in the fluorescent quiet of the hospital corridor. He needed guardianship to get to it, I said. He needed guardianship to look legitimate and conservatorship to petition for access to the funds. And he needed Claire to be gone before you or I could do anything to complicate that. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Carol, I had to push the word out past something that had lodged in my chest. She came to you 6 weeks ago. She knew something was wrong. She suspected. There's a distinction she was very precise about. She didn't have proof. She had instinct and a few observations she couldn't fully explain. A beat. She was protecting you, Leo. She didn't want you to spend months worrying about something that might turn out to be nothing. I thought about the Sunday call. Marcus has been asking questions about my insurance. You're probably right. Never mind. How's your garden? She had been protecting me. While she was 37 weeks pregnant and already sitting across from her lawyer, laying out contingencies for the worst thing she could imagine, she had been protecting me. I put my free hand flat on the counter and breathed. What do we do? I asked. We move fast. Carol's voice sharpened. I'm filing a counterpetition for temporary emergency custody on your behalf when the court opens at 8:30. You have standing as Claire's surviving parent and as co-trustee of the child's trust. We'll present the trust documents, my affidavit regarding Claire's visit, and whatever supporting evidence we can put together in the next 2 hours. What kind of evidence? That's the second reason I said I'd been waiting for your call. She paused. Leo, I've already been in contact with Robert Thorne, the security director at Harlow Medical Center. I called him at 5:15 and requested that all security camera footage from the hospital's public areas be preserved. Hallways, elevators, the administrative corridor, midnight to 6 a.m. Another pause. If Marcus was doing what you're describing, making calls, filing documents, moving through that building while his wife was dying, it's all recorded. I want that footage before anyone has a reason to erase it. I heard the clock on the wall above the nursing station tick once, twice. Robert Thorne agreed, I asked. He said he'd have everything flagged and secured within the hour. The hospital's legal department is aware. She said it the way you say something that took effort and isn't done being difficult. I have 8:30. I need you to do one thing before then. What? The nurse, the one you mentioned on the voicemail. The one who wrote things down. A pause. Get her statement before the shift changes and she goes home. Her testimony corroborates the timeline. I need it in writing signed before we walk into that courthouse. I looked down the corridor. Rita was still at the station, head bent over her chart, the spiral notebook visible beside her elbow. I'll get it, I said. Leo. Carol's voice dropped half a register. I'm sorry about Claire, genuinely. She was one of the most clear-headed people I've ever sat across a desk from. A beat. Let's make sure what she set up actually does what she intended it to do. I ended the call. 8:30. That was 2 hours and 43 minutes away. I walked back toward the nursing station with Carol's words arranging themselves into something that felt for the first time since 11:43 the previous night like a plan. Rita looked up when I reached the station. Before I could say anything, she held up one hand, not stopping me, more like she'd already anticipated the next part of the conversation. She reached beneath the counter and set the spiral notebook on the surface between us. I had time to write it up properly, she said, while you were on the phone. She'd added 2 pages since I'd last seen it. The notes from the hallway, the overheard conversation, the time-stamped observation about Marcus and the document were now written out in full sentences organized chronologically, with her credentials listed at the top and her signature at the bottom of each page. Rita A. Coleman, RN, Harlow Medical Center, shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., October 14th to 15th, 2025. You were already preparing it, I said. I've been preparing it since about 12:45 this morning. She looked at me steadily. What he said in that hallway wasn't something I was going to forget, Mr. Hargrove. I just needed to know there was somewhere useful for it to go. I folded the pages carefully and put them in my jacket pocket. I need you to be willing to say all of this to a lawyer, maybe to a court. I know, she said. I'll do what I need to do. She paused. 19 years in this building. You see a lot of things you can't undo. This one I can at least try to do something about. She went back to her charting. Shift change was in 45 minutes. I had what I needed. At 7:52, a man came through the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor and walked toward the nursing station with the specific purposeful stride of someone who had cleared his schedule for the morning. He was in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, wearing a blue Oxford shirt with a hospital ID clipped to the breast pocket. Robert Thorne, Director of Security, Harlow Medical Center. His handshake was firm and brief. Mr. Hargrove, he didn't waste time. I spoke with Ms. Deming at 5:15. Everything from midnight to 6 a.m. has been flagged and secured hallway cameras on the third floor, the elevator banks, and the administrative services corridor. Nothing's been touched. Nothing's been deleted. My team has it locked. What does it show? I asked. He pulled out his phone and angled the screen toward me. Stills from the footage time-coded. He wasn't authorized to share the full recordings outside of a formal legal request, he explained, but the visual record was there, and it was clear. At 12:31 a.m., the hallway camera outside the surgical suite showed 3 people in close conference near the elevator bank. Marcus leaning toward Diane. Diane with her head inclined, hand raised in a small directing gesture. Petra with her phone, held up finger pointing at something on the screen, not showing it to them for entertainment, but presenting it the way you show someone a document. The body language in that still was not the body language of 3 people receiving terrible news. It was the body language of 3 people adjusting a plan. At 1:10 a.m., the elevator footage showed Marcus stepping off on the parking level. He was on his phone before the doors finished opening. He stayed in the garage, the timestamp confirmed it, for 11 minutes. Then he came back up. At 2:19 a.m., the admin corridor footage showed Marcus at the after-hours service window, papers crossing the counter, conversation. Marcus collected something from the window staff member and went down the stairwell. No audio. But the footage didn't need audio. It needed exactly what it had, a timeline that aligned point by point with everything Rita had written in the spiral notebook and everything Sandra Dunmore had confirmed about the guardianship filing. If Carol's going to want a formal copy through the court, I said. We'll produce it. She'll have it by 10. He pocketed his phone. Anything else you need from my side this morning, you call me directly. He handed me a card. Then he walked back toward the stairwell, the same way he'd come. And I stood at the nursing station and looked at the clock on the wall. 8:02. Marcus arrived at 8:05. I saw him come through the main entrance, the same navy jacket from last night, freshened up manila envelope under his arm. He moved through the lobby with the air of a man who had an appointment he intended to keep. He went directly to the administrative services window and spoke to the woman at the desk. I was too far away to hear the words, but the exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. The woman shook her head. Marcus said something else. The woman picked up the phone on her desk, called someone brief conversation, shook her head again. Marcus set one hand flat on the counter, controlled. Not a slam, just the deliberate placement of someone reminding themselves to stay inside the lines. He said something short and final, pushed off the counter and turned. That was when he saw me. I was standing at the far end of the lobby near the elevator bank 15 feet away, with my jacket from the night before, and whatever expression the last 8 hours had left on my face. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't approaching. I was just standing there watching him, the same way he'd watched me for years, across dinner tables and holiday gatherings. The careful, patient watching of 2 people who had always understood that they were measuring each other. His expression went through 3 things quickly. The first was surprise. The second was a calculation I could almost see him running. The third was the face he settled on, the grief face deployed like a tool smoothed back into place. He started walking toward me, slowly, steadily. And the closer he got, the more clearly I could see that the face he was wearing didn't quite match the eyes behind it. The eyes were working on something else entirely. In 19 years, Rita had said, I know what grief looks like, and this wasn't it. I kept my feet where they were and waited for him to close the distance. He stopped 2 feet away from me. Up close, I could see what the distance had hidden, the precise way he'd arranged his expression. The practiced set of his jaw, the eyes that were running calculations behind a surface of sorrow. I had looked at that face across holiday tables for 4 years and seen a man I didn't entirely like but had accepted because Claire did. Now I looked at it and saw something else. A performance. A very good one. But a performance. Leo. His voice was low-controlled, designed to project intimacy. I know this isn't the right time for anything except grief, but there are things we need to work through together, for the baby's sake. What's her name? I asked. He paused. A small pause, barely a beat, but I caught it. We hadn't decided yet. Claire wanted to wait until... You called her the baby in the parking garage last night, I said. At 1 a.m, on the phone. You said her existence changed your timeline. I watched his face. You didn't sound like a man who hadn't decided on a name yet. You sounded like a man who was running a schedule. The lobby was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system above us. Marcus didn't move. He was recalibrating. I could almost see it, the way a compass needle trembles before it settles. I was on the phone with my attorney, he said carefully. There are legal matters that don't wait even in circumstances like these. I was trying to make sure everything was in order. I know about the Friday deadline, I said. Silence. I know about the 3 visits to the hospital financial counselor. I know about the beneficiary designation form. I kept my voice level, unhurried, the way Carol had kept hers on the phone that morning. And I know you filed an emergency guardianship petition at Fulton County Probate Court last night, at 2 a.m, while my daughter's body was still warm. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Then something behind his eyes went flat and careful, like a door being closed from the inside. Leo, Diane's voice came from behind him. She appeared at his shoulder the way she always appeared, perfectly positioned, perfectly timed. She was wearing a dark blazer that she had not been wearing the night before, which meant she had gone home and come back, which meant she had slept while I had not. I understand you're devastated. We all are. But making accusations against your son-in-law in a hospital lobby the morning after Claire died is not something any of us should be doing. I haven't made an accusation, I said. I've stated facts. Diane's expression didn't change. It never really changed. That was the thing about Diane. The surface was always the same, composed and polished, and whatever was moving underneath it had learned long ago to move quietly. Marcus stepped forward, slightly angling between me and his mother, the way a man does when he wants to take control of a conversation that's going wrong. Leo, I loved Claire. Whatever you've heard, whatever you think is happening, I need you to know that my priority is that child upstairs and what's best for her. Tell me about the debt, Marcus. The words landed the way I'd intended them to, quietly, with no drama, no elevation of voice. Just the fact of them placed between us like something set down on a table. Marcus went very still. Behind him, Petra, who had been standing 2 steps back and slightly to the side, stopped moving entirely. She was looking at the floor, not at Marcus, not at me, at the floor with the focused non-expression of someone who had been trained to give nothing away when things started going sideways. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said. His voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but it had thinned the layer beneath, starting to show through. All right, I said. I looked at him for one more moment, at Diane, at Petra, looking at the floor. I thought about the envelope. I thought about the parking garage. I thought about Carol sitting down with my daughter 6 weeks ago in an office across town while Claire said, quietly and precisely, that something was wrong and she wanted to make sure certain things were protected. Then I turned and walked toward the elevator. Leo, Marcus's voice followed me, sharper now, the performance thinning further at the edges. We need to handle this as a family. I pressed the call button without turning around. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. The doors closed. In the quiet of the elevator, I exhaled for what felt like the first time since the confrontation had started. My hands were steady. I was grateful for that, at least that whatever I was feeling had stayed on the inside where it belonged. My phone buzzed. A text from Carol. 4 words. Come to 4, now. The 4th floor. I pressed the button. The elevator began to move upward, and whatever had just happened in that lobby was already behind me, already arranged in a file I'd deal with later. Whatever was on the 4th floor was the thing I was moving toward now. Before I tell you what Carol found waiting on the 4th floor, and trust me, nothing about this story prepared me for it, either drop a 9 in the comments right now, just so I know you're still here with me. A small note before we continue this story contains some plot points that have been constructed and adjusted for narrative and reflection purposes. If that doesn't suit you, that's okay. You can stop here. But if you do continue, what lies ahead won't disappoint you. The elevator opened onto a different kind of quiet. The 3rd floor had the urgency of emergency medicine, the quick steps, the equipment on wheels, the sense of time being rationed carefully. The 4th floor was quieter, more deliberate. The lighting was softer, and the air had the particular controlled stillness of a place designed to give fragile things the best possible chance. Carol was standing near the nurse's station with a man I hadn't seen before. He was in his early 50s, tall, with the unhurried posture of someone who had learned that moving calmly in a crisis was itself a form of competence. His ID badge read, Dr. James Whitfield, Director, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Mr. Hargrove? He extended his hand. His grip was firm and measured. I'm James Whitfield. I've been overseeing the neonatal unit here for 11 years. I need to speak with you privately, and I want to do it properly. He gestured toward a consultation room off the main corridor, small, clean 2 chairs, a window, looking out onto a narrow courtyard. He sat down first. I'd learned enough in the past 12 hours to understand what it meant when a doctor chose to sit. "There's something I should have been able to tell you earlier this morning," he said. "And the reason I couldn't is connected to a decision your daughter made which I want you to understand before I explain what's happened." He leaned forward slightly. Claire was carrying twins. The room didn't change. The light through the window didn't change. And yet everything rearranged itself in some way I couldn't immediately process. She was carrying twins," I repeated. "She came to me at 28 weeks alone, without her husband during a specialized prenatal scan. Twin B had been in a posterior position throughout the pregnancy, partially obscured behind twin A. It's a presentation we see with monochorionic diamniotic twins. They share a placenta but have separate amniotic sacs. The second baby was missed on earlier routine scans, which is uncommon but not impossible given the positioning." He spoke carefully without rushing. When I showed Claire what I'd found, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me to monitor both babies closely, but to delay formal documentation of twin B in the shared chart. She asked you to keep it off the record. She signed a patient directive requesting a delay in formal documentation. It's within a patient's rights to defer non-emergency record updates within reason. She said she wasn't ready. He paused. She said she needed time to work some things out first. I respected that. I monitored both babies at every subsequent appointment. Both were developing within normal parameters. I thought about the Sunday lunch 3 weeks ago, the way Claire had rested her hands on her belly. "I think so, Daddy. I think so." She hadn't been carrying one child that day. She'd been carrying 2. And she'd known something was wrong with Marcus, and she'd been protecting both of them in the only way she could figure out how to do it alone. "She was keeping the second baby out of reach," I said quietly. Whitfield held my gaze. "That's not a conclusion I'm able to draw professionally, but I can tell you that she was deliberate about her decisions, and she was not a person who acted without thinking things through." Carol put her hand briefly on my arm, then withdrew it. I looked at Whitfield. "What happened during the procedure?" "The emergency C-section was initiated when Claire's condition deteriorated rapidly. During the procedure, we delivered both babies." He paused, and I felt the pause before I understood it. Twin A did not survive. She was delivered first, and the complications that had already taken hold were too advanced. His voice didn't waver, but it softened by a fraction. Twin B was delivered successfully. She required immediate NICU support, but she was breathing. She has been stable since 4:47 this morning. The silence in the room was complete. 1, 2. The numbers rearranged themselves. 1 child lost, 1 child alive, and my daughter gone. "Can I see her?" I asked. Whitfield stood. "That's why I brought you up here." He led me down the corridor to a wide window. Beyond the glass, a row of Isolet's clear plastic pods with the equipment of survival attached to each one. He stopped at the third one from the left. She was smaller than I had imagined. She was smaller than I'd been able to imagine. 3 pounds and 4 ounces, he'd said, and the number had seemed abstract until I saw her a presence so slight that the wires and tubes monitoring her looked almost comically oversized by comparison. She was wrapped and capped and breathing with the focused, steady effort of someone who had decided very early that this was not going to be the end of her story. I put my hand on the glass. I don't know how long I stood there. The sounds of the unit moved around me, the soft percussion of monitors, the low voices of the nurses making their rounds, and I didn't hear any of it. She had Claire's nose. I was certain of it. The particular slight upturn at the end that I'd watched my daughter have since the day she was born. I was certain standing at that glass in the way you can be certain of something before you have any reason to be. "Does Marcus know?" I asked. Whitfield answered without hesitation. "He was informed at 9:47 this morning. We are required to notify the next of kin." 9:47. I ran the timeline backward. I had been in the lobby confronting Marcus at 10:30. He'd known about this baby for over half an hour by the time he walked across that lobby toward me. "Carol," I said without turning from the glass. "He filed an amended guardianship petition at 10:08, she said. Her voice was level. 21 minutes after being informed she existed, before you knew." I kept my hand on the glass. 21 minutes. While I had been talking to Robert Thorne about camera footage on the 3rd floor, Marcus had been downstairs adding a child he'd never held to a legal document. She was breathing, steady and real and impossibly here. And somewhere in the building below me, a man who had filed for her before he'd laid eyes on her was already running out of time. Carol was already moving toward the consultation room before I'd taken my hand off the glass. "Come sit down," she said. All of it. I want you to understand all of it. The room was the same kind they had on every floor, small table, 4 chairs, a box of tissues on the windowsill that no one ever touched until they needed to. I sat across from her. Dr. Whitfield remained standing near the door, arms folded with the quiet authority of a man who had made space in his afternoon for exactly this conversation. You understand the basic structure of the trust, Carol began, but I want to walk through what Marcus would actually need to do to access it so you can see the full picture. Go ahead. The trust names you and me as co-trustees. We manage the assets on behalf of the beneficiary Nora. Neither of us can act unilaterally. We have to agree on distributions, and any distribution has to be for the beneficiary's direct benefit. Marcus, as Claire's surviving spouse, has no automatic right to the trust assets. They are not part of Claire's probate estate. They exist separately under the trust's own terms. So he's locked out. From direct access, yes, but... She set her hands flat on the table. If Marcus obtains legal guardianship and conservatorship over Nora, he gains something specific: the ability to make care decisions and petition the probate court for financial distributions on her behalf. He would go before a judge and say, "My daughter requires these funds for her care, her medical costs, her housing." Courts approve these petitions regularly when the expenses are legitimate. The trust would have to respond, produce records, argue against distributions, and if Marcus's attorney is competent, he can drag that process out for months. In the months in which he's drawing from the trust, months in which he's petitioning to draw from it. Some requests would be denied, others might not be. And in the meantime, he has legal access to the financial infrastructure around Nora, her insurance claims, her medical billing records, her benefit designations. Carol paused. That's where the beneficiary change form becomes relevant. If he can redirect the insurance payments for Nora's care to an account he controls, he doesn't even need large trust distributions. He just needs the smaller routine flows of money that don't attract the same level of scrutiny. I thought about Petra, the address on the form Rita had found, a P.O. box that didn't belong to anyone in that family. How much are we talking about? I asked. Total. Claire's life insurance policy is $500,000. Her investment account, which she opened before the marriage and maintained in her name, is approximately $240,000. She also holds a property interest in the marital home. She purchased it before they married and retained sole title as a condition of the mortgage. That interest is valued at roughly $100,000, possibly more, depending on current market. Carol looked at me steadily. Total trust value approximately $840,000. $840,000. I sat with the number. There's one more piece, Carol said, and something in her voice made me focus more sharply. I pulled Marcus's public court records this morning. Civil judgments in Georgia are filed with the clerk of the Superior Court and are part of the public record. Anyone can look them up. She opened her folder. Marcus has a civil judgment against him, filed September 12, 2025. Creditor Meridian Capital Holdings, amount $290,000. I knew what a civil judgment was, in the general sense a court's formal ruling that a person owes a debt. Unlike a criminal conviction, a civil judgment doesn't result in jail time. But it has teeth. A creditor with a judgment can garnish wages, seize bank accounts, and attach property. And in Georgia, a civil judgment becomes enforceable immediately upon filing unless the debtor posts a bond or appeals. Oh, the court date, I asked. November 7th, 2025. Carol held the pause. 23 days from now. If Marcus appears before the court on November 7th without a viable path to satisfying the judgment, the creditor can begin enforcement proceedings immediately. Wage garnishment, asset seizure, whatever Marcus owns that isn't protected. The number aligned itself in my head like tumblers in a lock. $290,000 owed. $840,000 in a trust he couldn't touch without guardianship. A court date in 23 days. A wife due to give birth any week. He needed Claire to die before November the 7th, I said. It came out quietly, not a question. Carol didn't answer. She didn't have to. The answer was in the timeline in the form in the emergency petition, filed at 2 a.m, in the amended petition filed 21 minutes after a nurse informed him his daughter had survived. He hadn't reacted to a tragedy. He had activated a plan. The tragedy had simply moved his schedule forward. I looked at the table for a long moment. Then I looked at Whitfield. He's going to try to get into the NICU, I said. Whitfield nodded once. I've already addressed that. Effective this morning, I've placed a medical visitor restriction on Nora's isolette. As the attending neonatologist, I have the authority to limit NICU access when I believe unrestricted visitation may compromise the patient's care environment particularly when there is an active legal dispute involving the patient's welfare. He said it precisely the way a man says something he has already written down. The approved visitor list currently contains one name, Leonard Hargrove. He'll challenge it. He'll need a court order to override it. That takes time. Whitfield's expression didn't change. She's gaining weight. She doesn't need the disruption. Carol was already gathering her papers. I'm filing the counterpetition for temporary emergency custody at 3 o'clock. I have your signed authorization from last night, the trust documents, my affidavit, and Rita Coleman's witness statement. She stood. I'll call you when it's filed. She left. Whitfield left shortly after, with a brief nod that said everything that needed to be said. I sat alone in the consultation room for a few minutes. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. Leo, Marcus's voice. Careful modulated the charm turned back up to its default setting. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot this morning. I'd like to talk just the two of us without lawyers in the way. As family. I looked out the window at the narrow courtyard below. My lawyer handles all communications from this point forward, I said. Don't call this number again. I ended the call. He called back twice more in the next hour. I let both go to voicemail. At 6:15 in the evening, a NICU nurse named Deborah, whose patience and kindness I have never adequately thanked, led me through the secured doors and to the chair beside Nora's isolette. The room was warm and dim, and full of the soft, constant sounds of machines keeping small things alive. A few other isolettes along the wall. Other families in other chairs doing the same thing I was doing, sitting close to someone very small and very fragile, and deciding all over again to hold on. I sat. I didn't touch her. The nurse explained the protocol, and I followed it exactly, because the last thing I was going to do was make anything harder for that child than it already was. I just sat. I looked at her face and her hands and the steadiness of her breathing and the way she seemed, for all her smallness, entirely determined to be here. Your mother was the same way, I told her quietly, stubborn from the beginning. I stayed for 40 minutes. When Deborah indicated it was time, I stood carefully, looked at Nora one more time, and walked back into the hallway. Carol called at 7:43. Something in her voice had changed from the morning call, not alarmed, but recalibrated in the way a voice gets when it has processed new information and is deciding how to present it. Leo, she said, Marcus's attorney made contact with my office this afternoon. And, a pause, there are some things we need to discuss in person. Can you be at my office tomorrow morning at 8 opposite? I said yes. I asked what they'd said. She told me she'd explain everything tomorrow, and then she said something she hadn't said yet in all the hours since 5:47 that morning. Get some sleep tonight, Leo. You're going to need it. Enbu plastim store swirl. I did not sleep. I drove home at 9:30, sat in the kitchen for a while, looked at the chair where Claire used to sit when she came for Sunday lunch, and decided that the bed was not going to be useful. I made coffee. I read over the notes I'd written on a legal pad during the long hours at the hospital, names times the numbers Carol had laid out across the consultation room table. I read them until the numbers stopped being numbers and started being a story. Then I drove back toward Midtown Atlanta before 6 in the morning, parked in the garage below Carol's building, and waited for the elevator. Carol was already at her desk when I came in. She had the look of someone who had also not slept or had slept briefly and efficiently in the way of people who have learned to function on less than they need. She waved me to the chair across from her without preamble. Marcus's attorney called my office at 4:30 yesterday afternoon, she said. His name is Jeffrey Strand. He's competent. I've been across a table from him twice before. He informed me that his client intends to file for an expedited guardianship hearing on the grounds that the current NICU visitation restriction constitutes unlawful interference with a biological parent's rights. Can he do that? He can file the motion. Whether the court grants the expedited hearing is a different question. Carol set her hands on the desk. Strand also indicated that if we proceed with our counterpetition, Marcus will argue that you have no standing beyond being Claire's father, that the trust arrangement does not grant you parental rights over Nora, only financial management authority. Is he right? He's partially right, which is more dangerous than being entirely wrong. She pulled a folder toward her. Co-trustee standing gives us strong grounds to challenge his access to the trust. But for guardianship of the child herself, we need to argue your fitness as a caregiver against his rights as the biological father. In Georgia, a biological parent's rights are presumptive. The court starts from the assumption that a parent should raise their own child. To overcome that presumption, we need to demonstrate that Marcus's custody of Nora would be contrary to her welfare. $290,000 in debt with a court deadline in 3 weeks isn't enough. It's evidence of financial problems. It's not automatically evidence of the parental unfitness. She paused. Unless we can show that his financial situation led him to take actions that endangered Nora specifically, which is what the petition is going to argue. She opened the folder. I filed the counter petition at 3:07 yesterday afternoon. We're requesting temporary emergency custody for you pending a full guardianship hearing. The petition includes the trust documents and Claire's patient directive to Dr. Whitfield. My affidavit regarding Claire's visit to my office 6 weeks ago. Rita Coleman's signed witness statement with timestamps and the camera footage formally obtained from Robert Thorne via the hospital's legal department. She slid a copy of the filing across the desk. It was thick, more pages than I'd expected. There's one more thing, she said, and this is why I needed you to come in. She waited a beat the way she did when she wanted to make sure I was actually listening and not just hearing. I submitted a formal subpoena to Harlow Medical Center's legal department requesting their system audit logs, specifically the access records for the Patient Financial Services Portal and the NICU Records Management System. A subpoena compels production of documents regardless of whether the organization wants to provide them. The hospital's legal department had no grounds to refuse. She opened a second folder. The logs were produced yesterday evening. I looked at the pages she turned toward me. Audit logs. Carol explained are automatic records generated by hospital computer systems every time someone logs in, accesses a file, or makes a change. The system records the user's ID, the timestamp, and what was accessed. They exist precisely for situations like this to create an objective machine-generated record that can't be altered or selectively remembered. The logs she was showing me told a specific story. In August 2025, a staff ID belonging to an employee named Daniel Price had accessed Claire Hargrove Voss's patient financial services records, twice. Then again in September. Daniel Price, according to the hospital's personnel directory, was a financial counselor in the patient services department, the same department Marcus had visited 3 times. He's the inside person, I said. He gave Marcus access to financial information he had no right to see, Carol said. Claire's insurance policy details, her account beneficiary information, the kind of information that would tell a person exactly what was at stake and how to position themselves to reach it. Can you prove they were in contact? The hospital has records of 3 in-person consultations between Marcus Voss and Daniel Price, logged as standard patient-family financial counseling sessions. Except Claire wasn't present for any of them, and the records don't reflect any standard billing or insurance inquiry that would have required those meetings. She paused. And there's one more entry in the log. She turned the page. At 3:22 a.m. on October 15th, the night Claire died, before any attending physician outside the surgical suite had documented the surviving twin, Price's staff ID had been used to access the NICU Records Management System using a supervisory override code, a code he was not authorized to use. He had accessed the file associated with Nora's admission. He was in the system before I even knew she existed, I said. Yes. I sat back in my chair. Marcus had known about the twins since at least August. He'd had a source inside the hospital who could pull Claire's records and watch the situation develop. He'd known that a surviving child doubled the insurance payout. He'd known the trust existed or suspected it, and he'd been building toward this for months. What happens to Price? I asked. The hospital placed him on administrative leave yesterday evening, pending a formal internal investigation. The audit log has also been forwarded to the Georgia Department of Insurance, accessing a patient's insurance record without authorization, and sharing that information is a violation of HIPAA and potentially constitutes insurance fraud. Carol looked at me steadily. This isn't just a custody matter anymore, Leo. What Price did and what Marcus directed him to do, that's a criminal exposure. Does that help our petition? It strengthens the argument that Marcus's interest in Nora is financial rather than parental. That is directly relevant to the question of whether his custody would serve her welfare. She closed the folder. We have a hearing scheduled for Sunday. Judge Maris will hear both petitions. I nodded, stood, looked at the folder on her desk. Carol, I said, when you met with Claire 6 weeks ago, was she frightened? Carol considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. She was precise, she said finally. There's a kind of calm that comes from being frightened and deciding to do something about it anyway. That's what she had. A pause. She asked me twice if the trust would hold up. I told her it would. She nodded and said, "Good." And then she left. I walked out into the Atlanta morning, carrying that image, my daughter, 37 weeks pregnant, sitting across a desk from her lawyer and making sure certain things held. That evening, Deborah let me in to sit with Nora again. She was off the supplemental oxygen. Her weight was up by 11 grams from the morning check. Small numbers, enormous to me. I sat beside the isolette and told her about her mother, not the hard parts, not yet. I told her about the Sunday lunches, about the yellow duck backpack, about the way Claire laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She had enough stubborn in her for both of you, I said, so you come by it honestly. At 6:14 in the morning, on October 17th, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Rita Coleman. 4 words. Check your email, now. I was already reaching for my phone before I was fully awake. The text had come in at 6:14, and whatever the hour, whatever the residual weight of the past 3 days, Rita Coleman was not the kind of person who sent messages at dawn without a reason. I opened the email. She'd sent a photograph, low light, slightly angled, taken with a phone held carefully steady, the kind of photograph someone takes when they want to document something exactly as it appears without disturbing it. The subject was a piece of paper on a floor partially crumpled one corner, folded under as though it had been stepped on. Near the bottom of the frame, the baseboard of a wall and the edge of what I recognized as the family consultation room door on the 3rd floor. The paper was partially smoothed in the center enough to read the header. Harlow Medical Center, patient benefit, services change of address, benefit payment recipient. Below it, partially visible through the creases, a name, Petra Klein, and below that, a P.O. box number with a zip code that I was almost certain didn't belong to any address I'd ever associated with Marcus or anyone connected to him. Rita had added a single line below the photo. I found it on the floor near the consultation room door this morning. I didn't move it. I photographed it first. I called her immediately. She answered on the 2nd ring. I'm still on shift, she said, keeping her voice low. I can talk for a few minutes. The form, I said. How did it get on the floor? My best guess is that it fell out of someone's bag or folder when they came out of the consultation room. The edge of it was just inside the doorway, like it got kicked slightly when the door opened outward. She paused. It looked like it had been folded into quarters and then partially unfolded, like someone had it tucked away and it came loose. Sometime between midnight and 6 this morning, I swept that hallway at the end of my last shift. It wasn't there. So, someone had been in that consultation room between midnight and 6 on the morning of October 17th. Someone carrying a document with Petra Klein's name on it. I'm coming in, I said. I was at the hospital by 7:30. Rita met me near the nursing station already in her street clothes she'd handed off to the day shift, 20 minutes earlier, but had waited. She led me to the spot near the consultation room door and showed me where the paper had been. The paper itself was now in a sealed plastic bag, the kind used in the hospital for patient belongings. I bagged it, she said, without touching the surface. I watched enough procedural television to know that much. A brief dry pause. I also called Carol Deming's office at 6:30 and told her what I'd found. Her assistant said she'd call you directly. My phone buzzed. Carol. I heard from Rita, she said before I could speak. I need you to photograph the bag and send it to me, and then keep it secured. Don't let it out of your sight until I can get someone to pick it up. I photographed the bag with Rita's form inside it and sent it to Carol. Rita handed it to me. I put it in the inner pocket of my jacket and pressed my hand flat against my chest for a moment, as though that would make it more secure. What does the form mean? I asked Carol. Practically, a change of address for benefit payment. Recipient is a document that redirects where a patient's insurance benefit payments are sent, Carol explained. When an insurance company processes a claim, say for a newborn's NICU care, they send the reimbursement to the address on file for the benefit recipient. If that address is changed, the payments go to the new address instead. So if someone filed this form, the reimbursements for Nora's care would go to a P.O. box controlled by Petra Klein, not to the hospital, not to Marcus's home address, to a box. A pause. This isn't just redirecting money, Leo. It's redirecting it through a name that creates a layer of separation from Marcus. If anyone looked at the financial trail, they'd see Petra, not him. I thought about Petra in the hallway on the night Claire died, standing slightly behind Marcus looking at her phone, the quiet efficiency of someone doing their part of something larger. She hadn't been a grieving family friend, she'd been infrastructure. Who is she? I asked. Really? I had my paralegal run her name through business registration databases this morning, Carol said. Petra Klein is listed as the registered agent for an LLC incorporated in Delaware, a company called Klein Financial Consulting Group. That LLC appears as a subcreditor in the Meridian Capital Holdings debt portfolio. In other words, she's not just connected to Marcus's debt, she is in part the debt. I stood in the hospital corridor and let that settle. Petra wasn't a friend Marcus had brought along for support. She was a creditor, or she represented the creditor's interests, which meant her presence at the hospital the night Claire died wasn't personal. It was transactional. She was there to make sure the investment paid off. A child's medical benefits redirected to a P.O. box, flowing into an LLC that was owed money by the child's father. The entire scheme laid out in a single crumpled page found on a hospital floor. "I'm filing for an emergency TRO this morning," Carol said. "A temporary restraining order. This is different from the custody petition. A TRO is specifically an injunction issued by a court to immediately halt a particular action. I'm asking the court to freeze any attempt to change the beneficiary designations or redirect benefit payments on any account associated with Nora or Claire's estate. The court can issue a TRO within hours if we demonstrate immediate risk." Does the form give us that? The form, combined with the existing evidence about Marcus's petition and financial situation, absolutely demonstrates immediate risk. Yes. She paused. "I'll have it filed before noon." It was filed at 11:47. I was in the waiting room outside Carol's office when she came out to tell me. She handed me a copy of the order, 3 pages signed by a Fulton County Superior Court judge, effective immediately. Any attempt to alter beneficiary designations, redirect benefit payments, or access the trust assets associated with Nora Voss. Hargrove was now legally enjoined, pending the full guardianship hearing. Marcus called my phone at 2:17. I let it ring 4 times, considering. Then I answered. "Leo." He had adjusted his approach again, softer now, more careful. The charm had been recalibrated slightly towards something that was trying to sound like exhaustion and grief. "I think we need to talk, just the 2 of us, before this gets any further." "There's nothing to discuss that doesn't go through Carol Deming," I said. "You have her number." "Leo, I understand you're—" "Goodbye, Marcus." I ended the call. He didn't call back this time. I drove to the hospital and sat with Nora for an hour in the late afternoon. She was awake, her eyes open, dark and unfocused, the way newborns' eyes are taking in a world they haven't learned to organize yet. Deborah told me her feeding was improving, another few ounces of weight. Each number, small each number, everything. At 7:15, I was in the parking garage heading to my car when a notification appeared on my phone. It was from a neighborhood community app, the kind that Atlanta subdivisions use to share alerts and announcements. Someone had tagged my account. The post was from Diane Voss. "Dear neighbors and friends, our family is heartbroken to share the loss of Claire Voss' beloved wife and daughter. A celebration of her life will be held this coming Tuesday, October 21st at 2 o'clock at Greystone Chapel in Buckhead. All who loved Claire are welcome. Arrangements have been lovingly made by the Voss family." The Voss family. I read it twice. The phrasing was precise in the way things are precise when precision is intentional. Not the Hargrove and Voss family, not her family and friends. The Voss family handling the arrangements, inviting the community to an event they had organized without consulting me to memorialize my daughter. I stood in the concrete cold of the parking garage and understood something that had been forming at the edge of my thinking for the past hour. This wasn't just a funeral. Diane was too strategic for anything to be just what it appeared to be. I called Carol. "Did you see the announcement?" I asked. "I saw it 10 minutes ago," she said. "I was going to call you." "What is she doing?" A pause. "I have a theory," Carol said, "but I'd rather hear what you think first." "You first," I said. "No," Carol said. "I mean it. Tell me what you think she's doing." I stood in the parking garage and looked at the announcement on my phone. The Voss family handling the arrangements, Greystone Chapel, Buckhead, a neighborhood that meant something in Atlanta, old money established community, the kind of place where reputation was a currency people actually spent. She's writing the story," I said, "before anyone else can." A pause. "Keep going." "If Marcus stands up in front of 200 people as the grieving husband, if Diane is the composed, gracious mother-in-law holding the family together, that becomes the version people know. The version that's already in place when any of this reaches a court. The judge sees a man who buried his wife with dignity, who surrounded himself with community, who looks like someone who should be raising his daughter." I paused. "And if I'm not part of the arrangements, if I'm standing on the outside of the event, my daughter's husband organized for my daughter's death, I look like the difficult one, the estranged one." Another pause, longer. "That's what I think too," Carol said quietly. I called James Caldwell when I got in the car. James had lived 3 houses down from me for 22 years. He'd been a Superior Court judge in Fulton County for 16 of those years before he retired, and he was the kind of man who used his professional knowledge the way a good neighbor uses a hammer, not constantly, but whenever something actually needed fixing. He'd watched Claire grow up from the distance of a friendly street, attended her high school graduation, at my invitation, sent flowers when she got married. He had, in the careful way of good neighbors, paid attention without intruding. He answered on the second ring. "Leo." The warmth in his voice was immediate. "I heard about Claire. I'm deeply sorry." "Thank you, James." I told him about the funeral announcement, about the documents Diane had mentioned, about all of it, the petition, the trust, the deadline, price Petra. James listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him that had always made him worth talking to. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "She's controlling the narrative," he said. "A courtroom and a church social work on the same principles, Leo. Whoever speaks first, loudest, and most publicly sets the frame that everyone else has to argue against. If Marcus and Diane walk into that chapel on Tuesday as the bereaved family, and walk out with documents signed in front of 200 witnesses, even documents of questionable legality, that image exists. It's harder to undo than people think." "What are the documents?" I asked. "Could be anything presented as routine estate administration. Acknowledgement of next of kin status, consent forms that look administrative but carry legal weight. Something that creates a paper record of community witnessed agreement, even if the agreement itself doesn't hold up in court." He paused. "The funeral is the venue. The community is the audience. And you're the only one who knows it's also a transaction. I need to be there." "Yes," he said simply. "You do, and you need to not be alone." Diane called me at 9 the following morning, Saturday. I was on my second cup of coffee, and I let the phone ring 3 times before I picked up long enough to arrange my expression, even though she couldn't see it. "Leo." Her voice was warm in the practiced way of someone who had been performing warmth for so long it was indistinguishable from the real thing. "I know this isn't easy for any of us. I want you to know that whatever our differences, Claire was the center of this family, and Tuesday is about honoring her. I appreciate that, Diane. We'd love for you to be there early if you're willing, to be part of things." A pause. "And there are a few estate formalities we'd like to take care of at the reception. Nothing complicated, just some routine administrative matters it would be good to have the family present for. Things that should have been handled before all of this happened." Estate formalities, at a reception, while 200 people were present. Under Georgia law, signing legal documents requires voluntary informed consent without coercion or undue influence. A judge could theoretically argue that signing documents at a funeral reception, while in grief surrounded by the deceased's in-laws and their community, with no independent legal counsel present, did not constitute fully voluntary consent. It wasn't illegal for Diane to ask, but it wasn't without risk for whoever signed. "Of course," I said. "What time does it start?" She told me 2 o'clock. She said Marcus would be saying a few words. She said the community had been so supportive. After I hung up, I called Carol. "Yes, she wants documents signed at the reception," I said. Carol was quiet for 2 seconds. "I expected something like that." Another second. "Leo, I can't prevent people from signing documents at a private event, but I can be present in a way that makes it very difficult for anything improper to go unchallenged." She paused. "Are you asking me to come?" "I'm asking you to set it up," I said. "All of it. Whatever you need, bring whoever you need to bring." The silence on her end was thoughtful rather than hesitant. "All right," she said. "I'll make some calls." That evening I sat at the kitchen table, in the house where Claire had grown up. The same table where she'd done homework, where we'd eaten 1,000 Sunday meals, where she'd told me she was getting married, with the careful hope of a person who wants their father to be happy about something, even if he has reservations. I tried to write her a letter. I got 3 sentences in before I stopped, because the letter kept wanting to be an apology, and I didn't think she would have wanted that from me. Instead, I let myself go back. September, 23 years ago. The air sharp and new. Claire in the yellow duck backpack she'd chosen herself, standing at the door of Ridgemont Elementary, with her small hand in mine and the particular seriousness on her face that she got when she was making herself be brave. "Don't let go, Daddy." "I won't." I had held on for as long as she needed me to, and then I'd let go because the whole point was always that she could walk through the door herself. She had walked through so many doors. I picked up the phone and called James. "Tuesday," I said. "Can you be there?" "I'll be there," he said. "I'll bring 3 people who've known me 20 years. You won't need to explain anything to any of them." I thanked him. I sat in the kitchen a little longer. Then I called Carol back. How many people do you think will be at that funeral?" she asked. 200, I said. Maybe more. Claire knew a lot of people. Carol was quiet for a moment. I heard her breathe once slowly, the way she breathed when she was thinking something through to its conclusion. Good, she said. Carol's one word stayed with me through the weekend. Good. Not reassuring, not promising. Just that single syllable weighted with the particular confidence of someone who had looked at the board and seen a move that wasn't obvious yet. I spent Saturday with Nora. Deborah was working the day shift, and she had begun to recognize me the way hospital staff recognize people who come back enough times, not with surprise, but with the small acknowledgement of a nod and a badge swipe, and the understanding that I knew the protocols. I scrubbed in. I sat in the chair beside the isolette. I talked to Nora the way I'd been talking to her every day quietly, about nothing, about everything, about her mother, about the way Atlanta looked in October, the light coming through the trees on the street where Claire grew up, about the Sunday lunches that I was going to have to figure out how to keep doing, even though they would be different now. Dr. Whitfield stopped by at midday. Nora was up another 14 grams. Her oxygen saturation was holding steady on room air. Ah, she's doing the work, he said. You just need to keep showing up. That was something I knew how to do. Sunday morning, I put on the only suit I owned that still fit properly and drove to Fulton County Courthouse. The emergency custody hearing was held in a smaller room than I'd imagined, that wood-paneled 2 tables facing the bench, no jury box, no audience gallery. Just Carol and me at one table, Jeffrey Strand and Marcus at the other, and a judge named Honorable Patricia Whitmore, who had the focused, unimpressible expression of someone who had heard every variation of every human dispute and was prepared to hear another. She had read the filings. That was clear from the first 5 minutes. She didn't need things explained to her. She needed them confirmed and expanded. She asked questions while Carol spoke. She interrupted Strand twice with clarifications. She was, Carol had told me, on the drive over, known for being rigorous and fair, and completely uninterested in dramatics. Carol laid out the record methodically. The trust established by Claire 6 weeks before her death, naming Leo and Carol as co-trustees, the child as sole beneficiary. The timeline of Marcus's filings emergency petition at 2 a.m., the night Claire died. Amended petition, 21 minutes after being informed Nora survived. Rita Coleman's signed witness statement, time-stamped specific. The camera footage from Robert Thorne, submitted via formal legal process, authenticated by the hospital's security department. The audit log showing Daniel Price's unauthorized access to Claire's financial records in August and September. The civil judgment, $290,000. Meridian Capital Holdings Court. Date November 7th, entered into the record as a public document, which it was. She also submitted the TRO that had been granted on Friday, and she submitted Petra Klein's business registration documents, the shell company's connection to the debt portfolio, and the partial form Rita had found near the consultation room door. It took her 40 minutes to present it all. She didn't rush. She didn't editorialize. She let the timeline do the work. Because a timeline, Carol had once told me, is the most honest thing in a courtroom. It doesn't have an agenda. It just shows what happened and when. Strand presented Marcus's case with the practiced confidence of a good attorney, arguing from a weaker position. His argument was structurally straightforward. Marcus was Nora's biological father. Biological parenthood in Georgia carries a legal presumption of fitness. The evidence against Marcus was circumstantial, suggestive of financial mismanagement, perhaps, but not of direct harm to the child. The NICU restriction was medically unwarranted. The trust arrangement gave Leo financial oversight, not parental authority. He was right about some of it. That was the uncomfortable part. He was making the argument a competent lawyer makes when the facts are inconvenient, but the law still offers handholds. Judge Whitmore asked Marcus directly whether he had visited Nora in the NICU since her birth. He said he had attempted to do so, but had been prevented by the visitation restriction. She asked when he had first held his daughter. A pause. He said he hadn't yet had the opportunity. She wrote something on the pad in front of her. Then she asked Strand, without looking up, whether his client could explain the specific timeline, the 21 minutes between being informed of his daughter's survival and filing an amended legal petition on her behalf. Strand said his client had been advised by counsel to move quickly in order to protect his parental rights. Judge Whitmore set her pen down. The court acknowledges Mr. Voss's standing as the biological father, she said. The court also notes several significant irregularities in the timeline and pattern of filings presented in this matter. The emergency custody petition filed at 2:14 a.m. The amended petition filed 21 minutes after notification of the child's survival. The beneficiary change documentation presented. These constitute collectively a factual record that raises legitimate concerns about the nature of the petitioner's interest in the child. She looked at both tables. Pending the full guardianship, hearing the court grants temporary emergency custody of the minor child to Leonard Hargrove. Mr. Voss retains parental rights and will be afforded supervised visitation on a schedule to be determined by this court. The medical restriction currently in place at Harlow Medical Center is affirmed pending further review. She signed the order. She moved to the next matter on her docket. It was in total less than 2 hours. I need to explain what the ruling meant because it's a distinction that matters. Temporary emergency custody is not the same as permanent guardianship. It's a provisional order, the court saying in effect that based on the evidence available right now, placing the child with Leo while the full hearing is prepared is the more conservative option. Marcus's parental rights were not terminated. He could still present his case at the full hearing, but until then, Nora came home with me. Or would when she was ready. It was not a victory, it was a position. Marcus walked out of the courthouse ahead of Strand without looking at me. He walked the way a man walks when he is keeping himself very carefully inside a boundary, because the alternative is losing something he hasn't finished fighting for yet. Strand stopped at the door and turned to Carol with a professional acknowledgement of one attorney to another. "We'll be filing the appeal this afternoon," he said. "I assumed as much," Carol said. He left. The appeal was filed at 3:47 p.m. Carol texted me the confirmation, and 40 minutes after that, she sent a second text. Meridian Capital's attorney filed a motion this afternoon. They're seeking to attach any assets Marcus might receive as surviving spouse or through parentage. The motion references the civil judgment and the court record from today's hearing. I read it twice. In legal terms, a motion to attach assets is a creditor's attempt to claim what they're owed from anything a debtor stands to receive. Meridian Capital had been watching the proceedings. They'd seen the guardianship filing, the trust amount, the court record, all of it now public. And they'd made their move, which meant that Marcus's debt, the $290,000 Meridian Capital Holdings, the November 7th deadline, was now part of the official court record in Fulton County. Anyone who wanted to look could find it. His lawyer, his mother, his neighbors, his daughter's community. Everyone who would be at Greystone Chapel on Tuesday. I drove to the house. I sat on the back porch with a glass of water and a photograph of Claire taken at one of the Sunday lunches maybe 2 years ago. Her laughing at something I'd said, caught mid-motion the way good photographs catch people. I sat there until the light changed and the yard went quiet. Carol called at 8:30. "There's one piece I haven't been able to fully account for yet," she said. "How Marcus first learned about the trust, specifically about Claire's visit to my office. I never told him. Claire certainly didn't. Price accessed her financial records at the hospital, but my office files are separate." A pause. "Someone told him, or he found it another way. I want to know which before Tuesday." "Will you know by then?" "I'll know by Monday," she said. "Get some sleep." I went inside. I looked at the house around me. Claire's drawings still on the refrigerator, covered by years of other things. But there underneath the way, important things usually are. I did not sleep well, but I slept. Carol called at 7:42. I was already up, had been since 5:30, sitting in the kitchen with coffee. I wasn't really tasting, listening to the neighborhood wake up through the window. Garbage trucks, a dog. The particular sound of a Monday morning that didn't know anything was different. I picked up before the second ring. "I found it," she said. I set the cup down. "Tell me." When Meridian Capital filed their motion on Sunday, they had to submit supporting documentation to the court, their records establishing the debt and Marcus's assets. Standard practice. Those records became part of the public court file. She paused. "I had my paralegal go through them last night. Buried in the financial accounting, a line item from July 2025. $3,400, paid to a company called Meridian Trace Consulting." "What is that?" "It's a private investigations firm, licensed in Georgia. They specialize in 2 things, asset location and matrimonial surveillance." Another pause, letting that land. "In other words, Marcus hired someone to watch Claire." I sat with that. In Georgia, hiring a private investigator to surveil a spouse is legal. Uncomfortable in most circumstances, but legal. I can document movements, photograph meetings, compile reports. The information gathered belongs to whoever hired them. It can be used in divorce proceedings, custody disputes, or apparently in calculating exactly what a pregnant woman is doing with her estate planning. "He saw her go to your office," I said. "Almost certainly. My building has a public parking structure. Anyone can follow someone and watch where they go, photograph who they visit." Carol's voice was steady, but something underneath it had tightened. "I've been in practice for 24 years. It never occurred to me that a client's husband might have someone watching her." "Well, she was 6 months pregnant." "Yes. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The yard was the same yard it always was, the maple Claire used to climb the fence she helped me paint when she was 13. The particular slant of morning light that hadn't changed in 30 years. He saw her go in, I said, and he knew what it meant. He knew what it meant, Carol confirmed. An estate attorney's office 6 months into a pregnancy alone. To a man already planning how to access what she had, that was a signal. He went to Price, got access to her hospital records for the detail, set up Petra's arrangement for the routing, and had everything in place before Claire went into labor. The entire structure of it assembled itself in my mind cleanly and completely, the way a puzzle assembles when the last piece goes in, not with satisfaction, but with the bleak recognition of something that had always been there, just hidden. Rita told me something this morning, Carol added. I called her before I called you. She cross-referenced the hospital's visitor log from August, the handwritten sign-in sheets for non-patient visitors. Someone signed in twice under the name Robert Mercer, listed as a family member visiting a patient on the second floor. The patient name was illegible or didn't correspond to anyone on census. A pause. Robert Mercer is the registered owner of Meridian Trace Consulting. The PI had been in the building, twice, while Claire was attending prenatal appointments upstairs. He was getting the layout, I said, learning the hospital, and potentially making contact with Price, coordinating the access. I leaned my forehead against the window glass for a moment. The maple tree stood in its October color red-gold, indifferent to everything. Is this admissible, the PI records? They were submitted by the creditor as part of their court filing, Carol said. They're in the public record. I can reference them in our supplemental filing, which I'm submitting this morning. It completes the chain. It explains how Marcus knew about the trust, which explains why his actions on the night Claire died were so immediate and specific. She paused. He didn't improvise that night, Leo. He executed. After we hung up, I called James Caldwell. He answered on the first ring. Tomorrow, he said before I could speak. I know. I'm ready. 3 people, all of them steady. We'll be in the back of the chapel before 2 o'clock. Thank you, James. Don't thank me yet. A pause. How are you holding up? I thought about how to answer that, honestly. I'm holding, I said. He accepted that. That's enough for now. I spent the afternoon going through the house, not packing anything, not rearranging, just moving through the rooms the way you do when you need to be somewhere familiar, while your mind works through something it hasn't finished processing yet. The kitchen, the hallway, Claire's old room, which I'd already started clearing to turn into a nursery. The walls still the same pale blue she'd chosen when she was 14, and gone through a phase of wanting everything to look like the sky. I sat on the edge of what used to be her bed and thought about the letter I'd been meaning to write. I got a pad of paper from the desk and sat back down. This time, I didn't stop at 3 sentences. I told her I was sorry it took me this long to understand what she'd been dealing with. I told her that what she had done going to Carol's office, setting up the trust, keeping the second baby off the shared chart, carrying all of it alone so I wouldn't worry, was the bravest thing I had ever witnessed, and I had witnessed her be brave many times over the course of her life. I told her that Nora was fighting. I told her she had Claire's nose, that I was certain of it, and that she was going to be someone worth knowing. I told her I was going to take care of it. I told her I was sorry I let go of her hand on the sidewalk that first morning, and that I understood now that letting go wasn't the mistake was thinking, that letting go meant I was done holding on. I folded the letter into quarters. I put it in the inner pocket of the suit jacket I'd hung, on the back of the chair, the one I'd be wearing tomorrow. At 8:47 in the evening, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Carol, a text, not a call. Everything is in place for tomorrow. Thorne will have what we need. James will be there. The process server and notary are confirmed. Then after a pause of about 30 seconds, a second message. One more thing. When the time comes, I think you should be the one to speak. Not me. You're her father. Whatever needs to be said in that room, it should come from you. I read it twice, set the phone down, looked at the suit jacket on the chair. I had spent the past week watching Carol speak for me and feeling grateful for it, for the precision of her language, for the structure she brought to things I could barely hold in my hands without them breaking. I had let her carry the legal weight because it was hers to carry, and because I trusted her, and because I had been in those first days barely capable of carrying myself. But she wasn't wrong. There were things that needed to be said tomorrow that a lawyer couldn't say. Not because they were beyond her competence, but because they required something else. A particular standing earned not in a law office, but in 30 years of Sunday lunches and yellow duck backpacks and letting go and not letting go. I looked at the jacket pocket, the folded paper inside it. I picked up the phone and typed back, "I'll be ready." Then I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. Tomorrow, 200 people would walk into Greystone Chapel believing they were attending a funeral. They were. But they were also walking into something else entirely. Zero. I got there an hour early. Not to help with the arrangements I hadn't been asked. Not to greet arrivals that wasn't my role in the event Diane had organized. I went early because I needed to see what had been built before I had to stand inside it, and because 45 minutes of sitting in a chapel pew with grief and nothing else to manage was something I owed Claire before the rest of the afternoon started. Greystone Chapel in Buckhead had that particular Atlanta gravitas that comes from limestone and decades-wide arched windows, ranks of polished wood pews, the quiet of a building that had absorbed enough human feeling over the years to feel permanent rather than constructed. Diane had staged it with precision, white flowers on every surface, photographs arranged on easels near the entrance, Claire at various ages, most of them, including Marcus, in positions of prominence. The overall effect was of a family unified in grief, which was, of course, exactly the intended effect. By 2 o'clock, the chapel was full. Closer to 250 than the 200 I'd estimated, teachers, friends, colleagues, neighbors, people from every chapter of Claire's life moving through the space with the careful consideration of people who genuinely felt something. James Caldwell came in at 1:55 with 3 steady people from the neighborhood and took seats in the back. Carol arrived 2 minutes later with 2 colleagues and the process server and the notary, all of them quiet and unremarkable as they settled into the last rows. Marcus entered at 2 o'clock exactly. He moved through the room with the practiced ease of a man who understood how social spaces worked, touching arms, receiving embraces, saying the right things in the right order. His eyes were appropriately red-rimmed. His suit was dark and correct. At the lectern, he was excellent. He told the story of meeting Claire at a barbecue in Virginia Highland. He described her laugh accurately enough that several people in the room smiled through their tears. He said she had made him want to be better, and he paused at exactly the right moment afterward, and someone in the middle rows was audibly crying by the time he returned to his seat. 250 people applauded quietly and genuinely. I sat in the 3rd row and kept my hands flat on my knees. The reception in the adjacent hall began at 3:30. Within 20 minutes, I could see what Diane was doing. She was working the room with direction not randomly, but in a specific pattern, guiding certain people toward a table near the far wall, where a neat folder of documents sat beside a pen. I watched her approach 2 of Claire's longtime friends, show them something from the folder, and watch one of them reach for the pen before the other touched her arm with a question I couldn't hear. At 3:52, Diane turned toward me. She crossed the room with the measured warmth of a woman who had decided that composure publicly displayed was its own form of argument. She touched my hand in the same way she'd touched it in the hospital corridor 6 days ago. "Leo, there are a few things we should take care of while the family is together." She opened the folder slightly. "Just administrative matters. Claire would have wanted things settled properly." I looked at the folder. I looked at her. "Before anyone signs anything," said a voice from the back of the room, "I need to address something on behalf of the trust and its beneficiary." Diane went still. Carol Deming had risen from her seat, composed, deliberate, the voice of someone who had decided and arrived at the moment of execution. Beside her, her 2 colleagues were standing. The process server had his bag open. The notary was removing her case with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times in many rooms. The ambient conversation died. 250 people turned. "This is a private family service," Diane said. Her voice stayed even, barely. "Your son brought legal documents to a funeral reception," Carol said, "and has spent the past 20 minutes soliciting signatures from people who don't know what they're agreeing to. That makes it my business." She looked past Diane at the room. "My name is Carol Deming. I'm an estate and trust attorney representing the trust established by Claire Hargrove Voss for her daughter, currently under the guardianship of Leonard Hargrove." She paused 1 beat. "I'm asking for a few minutes of everyone's patience. There are things this community deserves to know." From the back of the room, James Caldwell stood. He didn't speak. 22 years on the Fulton County Superior Court bench had given him a presence that preceded words. Several people near him recognized him. A murmur moved through the hall that wasn't quite words, but was clearly acknowledgement. Marcus rose from his chair. His face was doing the calculation I'd seen it do before. Rapid practice selecting the option that preserved the most. "This is not the place for this." Carol looked at him directly. "Mr. Voss, you filed an emergency guardianship petition at 2 in the morning, the night your wife died. You filed an amended petition 21 minutes after being informed your daughter had survived. You have documents on that table you intended to have signed today by people in this room who are grieving and unrepresented." She held his gaze without blinking. "With respect, I believe you've already determined what kind of place this is." The hall was completely silent. Diane's hand was at her throat, the same gesture I'd watched in the hospital corridor, the reflex of a woman reaching for something solid when the ground shifted. Petra, standing near the far wall, had stopped moving entirely. Marcus looked at me across the room, and for a moment, just a moment, the face he'd been wearing all afternoon slipped. Not into grief, into something else. The specific expression of a man who has played a long game and just understood that someone else had been playing longer. I held his gaze. 250 people stood in a chapel in Buckhead on a Tuesday afternoon in October, not entirely sure what they were witnessing, but understanding that it was something they were going to remember. The white flowers didn't know anything. The photographs on the easels didn't know anything. Claire smiled out of them the same way she always had, mid-motion, unconstrained, reaching for something just beyond the frame. Carol opened her portfolio. "What I'm about to share," she said to the room, "is drawn entirely from public court records and material obtained through formal legal process. Every document I reference is available to anyone who requests it from Fulton County Superior Court." She looked at the faces turned toward her neighbors, friends, colleagues, people who had loved Claire in good faith and come here to honor her in good faith. "I'm going to tell you what those records show, and then I'm going to let Leonard Hargrove speak." She looked at me. I stood up. I had never liked speaking in front of crowds. That's the first thing I thought when Carol looked at me, which is, under the circumstances, a remarkably ordinary thing to think. But it was true, and it was the truth that surfaced when everything else had quieted. Not fear exactly, more the awareness that I was about to say things in front of 250 people that I had never said out loud to anyone, and that once said they could not be unsaid. Carol spoke first, brief, precise, the way she did everything. "The documents on that table," she said, addressing the room, "include a beneficiary change form prepared the night Claire Hargrove Voss died, redirecting her life insurance proceeds. They include acknowledgement forms designed to establish a legal record of community-witnessed consent that could be used in subsequent court proceedings." She paused. "The court records in this matter, all public, all accessible, show the following. A guardianship petition filed at 2 a.m. the night Claire died. An amended petition filed 21 minutes after her surviving daughter's existence was confirmed. A civil judgment of $290,000 against Marcus Voss, due November 7th, 3 weeks from now. And a pattern of unauthorized access to Claire's medical and financial records by a hospital employee who met with Mr. Voss 3 times in the months preceding her death." She closed the folder. "Leonard Hargrove has been Claire's father for 27 years. He has something to say." The room looked at me. I had thought about what I was going to say for the past 2 days. I had thought about it the right way and the wrong way, the version that was organized and logical, the version that was angry, the version that went back through everything, and assembled it into an argument. None of those were the right version. So I said the true version. "My daughter came to her lawyer 6 weeks before she died," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me, but it was. "She went alone without telling me because she had noticed something was wrong, and she was trying to fix it before it became something I had to worry about." I paused. "She was 37 weeks pregnant. She had a private investigator following her movements. She had a husband asking her insurance company questions she found troubling, and she handled all of it quietly by herself because that was who she was. She faced the hard things the same way she always had, head down, doing the work." The room was very quiet. "I let her change the subject on the phone 6 weeks ago," I said. "She was worried, and I told her she was probably imagining things. And she said, 'Yeah, you're right. How's your garden?' And I let her change the subject. Because I believed she was fine. Because I believed the man she chose was the man I hoped he was." I stopped. "I was wrong about that, and I can't undo it. But I can do what she set up for me to do, and I can make sure the people in this room understand what they almost signed." I was going to say something else. I had something prepared for this moment, a summary of the legal situation, the trust what came next. But my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I almost didn't look at it, but something made me, the specific quality of the vibration perhaps, or the timing of it, landing in the half-second of silence between one sentence and the next. I looked. Gmail, a notification. The sender name read, Claire H.V. Sent October 14th, 11:23 p.m. Scheduled delivery, 7 days. My hands were not entirely steady when I opened it. I read it once in silence. The room waited. 250 people in a chapel hall on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Not moving, not entirely. Understanding what had stopped me, but understanding that something had. Then I read it aloud. "Dad, if you're reading this, the surgery didn't go the way we hoped. I know that because I'm writing it the night before, and I'm writing it because I want to make sure that if something goes wrong, you know exactly what to do. I paused. The baby or babies, Dr. Whitfield thinks there might be two. They need you, not Marcus, you. I set everything up with Carol. The trust, the documents, all of it. You're the trustee. You have everything you need. Another pause. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was scared, and I kept thinking I'd have more time, and I didn't want you to worry before I was sure. That was probably wrong of me. You would have been okay with knowing. The final line? Keep them safe. Keep them yours, see. I lowered my phone. Marcus walked out first. No announcement, no expression. He simply moved toward the door and went through it. Petra followed without looking at anyone. Jeffrey Strand, who had been standing near the back, left quietly 20 seconds later. Diane did not leave. She stood near the white flowers at the far end of the hall, one hand at her throat, and looked at the room that had known her daughter-in-law, and she was very still for a long time. The room was silent, not the silence of people who don't know what to say, the silence of people who have just heard something real and are giving it the space it deserved. James Caldwell in the back sat down slowly. He looked at his hands. I read the email one more time. I didn't need to. I had it already. The words already moving into the place where I would carry them. I just needed a moment to let her voice be her voice in the room before everything else started again. Then I folded it into my pocket, next to the letter I'd written her. The process server and notary collected their things and left quietly. Carol was already on her phone, speaking in the low, focused register of someone managing the next sequence of events. The white flowers were still on every surface. The photographs were still on the easels. Claire was still mid-motion in all of them, reaching for something just out of frame. I had one more thing to do, and it was the only thing that had ever really mattered. I drove from Greystone Chapel to Harlow Medical Center without stopping. The afternoon was thinning toward evening, the Atlanta skyline catching the last of the October light in the way it does in fall, everything briefly gold before the dark comes. I parked, I scrubbed in. I sat in the chair beside the isolette, and I looked at my granddaughter, and I let out a breath I had been holding for 7 days. She was awake, dark, unfocused eyes taking in the ceiling, the light, the ambient sounds of the unit processing the world, in the preliminary, diligent way of someone who had just arrived and was still compiling information. 3 pounds, 11 ounces, up from 3.4. The wires were fewer than they'd been the first time I saw her. I think we're going to be okay, I told her. She didn't respond. She was 6 days old and had more important things to be doing than confirming my assessments. But she stayed awake while I sat with her, which was enough. The aftermath of the following weeks arrived and passed. The way the aftermath of large things tends to, not all at once but in pieces, each one requiring attention and then resolution and then the next one. Marcus's appeal was heard and dismissed in early November. The full guardianship hearing took place on November 14th. Judge Whitmore, who had reviewed the complete record, granted permanent guardianship to me. She noted in her ruling that the pattern of conduct demonstrated by Marcus Voss showed at minimum a primary interest in the financial assets associated with the child rather than the child's welfare language that would later matter in ways I hadn't anticipated. Marcus's November 7th court date with Meridian Capital came and went. Without access to the trust and without the guardianship that would have let him petition for distributions, he had nothing to offer the creditor. Enforcement proceedings began. His accounts were attached. The house where Claire had lived went into foreclosure proceedings in December. He left Atlanta sometime around the 3rd week of November. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. Daniel Price was terminated from Harlow Medical Center and referred to the Georgia Department of Insurance for investigation into unauthorized access to patient financial records. Petra Klein's LLC was dissolved. The shell company's involvement in the debt scheme became part of the Meridian Capital litigation record, which was public, which meant anyone who wanted to understand what had happened could look it up. Carol filed the final trust accounting in late November. The assets were intact. The beneficiary was Nora. Everything Claire had set up held. I visited Nora every day. The numbers that Deborah and Dr. Whitfield reported to me each visit became the structure around which I organized my days. 12 grams, 8 grams, 21 grams. Off the feeding tube on November 2nd. First time I held her carefully and correctly with the nurse right there on November 9th. Her eyes, which had been dark and unfocused in those first days, began to find things, light faces, the particular interest of something new in the visual field. On a gray Thursday afternoon in late November, I was sitting beside her when a memory came to me that I hadn't accessed in years. Claire was 16. It was a Sunday, and we were in the kitchen doing nothing. In particular, she was doing homework at the table while I read the paper, the specific comfortable silence of people who have learned to occupy the same space without needing to fill it. She looked up from her textbook and said out of nowhere, the way teenagers ask things they've been sitting with for a while, "Daddy, why didn't you ever get married again after Mom left?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Some things you don't replace," I said. "You just learn to carry them differently." She looked at me for a moment. "That's sad." "And no," I said, "that's just love. Love doesn't actually require the other person to keep existing. It just requires you to keep going." She looked unconvinced in the way 16-year-olds look when adults say something they suspect is true, but aren't ready to agree with yet. Then she went back to her textbook. I thought about that afternoon beside Nora's isolette and understood that Claire had carried that conversation with her. Maybe she'd thought about it when things got hard with Marcus. Maybe she'd thought about it the night before, her surgery writing an email to her father, in the careful, precise way she did everything. Some things you don't replace. You just learn to carry them differently. December 14th was a Tuesday. Dr. Whitmore had cleared it. Dr. Whitfield had cleared it. The paperwork, and there had been a significant amount of paperwork, had been completed and filed and approved. Deborah had Nora ready at 10 in the morning, wrapped, capped 7 pounds, 2 ounces, which was a number that felt like a small miracle every time I said it. Rita Coleman was there. It was her day off. She was in a coat and scarf and had driven 40 minutes from her apartment in Decatur. And when I asked her why she'd come, she said, "I started this thing. I wanted to see how it ended." I didn't have a response adequate to that, so I just shook her hand. Dr. Whitfield shook mine at the NICU doors. "She was determined from the beginning," he said. "Runs in the family, apparently." He smiled the brief, genuine smile of someone who didn't deploy it often. "Take care of this one, Leo." "I will," I said. I carried Nora through the hospital doors and into the December morning. The Atlanta cold was a real cold winter, having arrived while we were all inside, dealing with everything else, the air sharp and clean, and carrying the smell of wood smoke from somewhere I couldn't identify. I put her in the car seat I had installed and checked twice, and had checked by the NICU nurse, and then checked one more time. I drove carefully. I talked to her the whole way. At the house, I sat in the rocking chair. In the room that used to be Claire's pale blue walls, the crib assembled the small lamp casting its particular warm light into the corners. I held Nora the right way, and I rocked slowly, and I looked at her face. She had her mother's nose. I had been certain of this from the first day. I remained certain. She was looking at me with the focused preliminary attention of someone making an assessment, 7 weeks old, already opinionated about the quality of information being gathered. "I know," I said. "There's a lot to take in." I thought about the email in my phone. I thought about the letter in my pocket. I thought about a sidewalk in September, 23 years ago, and a little girl with a yellow duck backpack who had looked up at me and said 3 words that had turned out to be the truest thing she ever told me. I looked at Nora. "As she asked me to keep you," I said. "So I kept you." The rocking chair moved. The lamp held its small circle of warmth. Outside, Atlanta went on, being Atlanta traffic and wood smoke, and the long, ordinary motion of a city that didn't know anything particular had happened today, or this week, or in the 7 weeks before it. Which was fine, we knew. That was enough. I used to think silence was the same as peace. It isn't. This is what I know. Now what this week of dad family revenge I never asked for taught me. Love is not passive. Love shows up. Love files paperwork at 5 in the morning and sits beside a glass isolette and reads an email from a daughter who knew somehow that her father would need those words exactly when they arrived. I'm not a perfect man. I let her change the subject when I should have asked harder questions. I told myself the discomfort I felt around Marcus was imagination. I let go when I should have held on tighter. Don't be like me. When the person you love tells you something feels wrong, believe them. Ask again. Stay in the conversation. If there's one thing I'd add, and I'm just a man sitting in a rocking chair in a pale blue room, it's this: I don't believe Nora survived by accident. Some people would call it medicine. I call it grace. God has a way of leaving one light on when everything else goes dark. These family stories revenge nobody wants to live through have a way of showing you exactly who people are under pressure. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes family stories revenge also shows you who you are capable of becoming. If this story moves something in you the way it moved me, leave a comment below. Tell me what you'd have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. And before the next story begins, a note: some of what you'll hear contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and understanding. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what speaks to you. But if you stay, I promise it's worth it.